University in Australia. As 2010 and 2012 Rotary Peace Fellow in Tokyo, Japan, Nelson research has focused on youth violence in East Timor country, where he did his applied field experience producing a youth radio for peace-building project with the organization Search for Common Ground. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our great panelist, Nelson Sanz, Cadena.
Well, I'm honored to be here today. Thank you so much for this opportunity. And today I'm going to talk about the issue of youth violence in post-conflict societies, and I'm going to take the case of East Timor, as it was mentioned before, to provide an example of how youth violence is related to transformation of gender roles in post-conflict societies. I just want to say that this is part of my master's thesis as part of the Rotary program, and it's a larger research that I've been involved in during the last 2 years at the University of ICU in Tokyo, Japan. Traditionally, the issue of youth violence is looked upon as a security issue into what I call the security discourse, in which a youth violence is understood as a threat to society and the stability of peace-building operations. As it has been mentioned before, the issue of youth violence in East Timor in particular is linked to what I call the 3L approach, which is the limited access to education, the living in condition of poverty, and the little chance of finding a job. So this is sort of the dominant discourse that we found when trying to find answers to the issue of youth violence in post-conflict and also developing countries. However, during my research in East Timor last year, I found that these 3 elements didn't provide me enough answers to understand the issue of youth violence in this particular context. I experienced living in East Timor as a post-conflict country with almost 10 years after the independence from Indonesia, and it's a country that is experiencing a very rapid transformation of the society as a whole. Politically, economically, and socially, the country has experienced a massive transformation. And this transformation has affected, in a way, or has impacted also the way people relate to each other, and how men and women, young and old, relate to each other. And this is what I call the transformation of gender roles that are experienced in countries such as Timor or many other countries that have experienced conflict, and they are now in the post-conflict era. As to give you an example of what I'm talking about, I want to talk about, for example, the issue of women. Contrary to what we might think, actually during the Indonesian time, women play a very important role in East Timor, leading and organizing the resistance movement that occurred in that country. Women become leaders in their communities, organizing these groups. However, the end of conflict created a sort of a tension area between women and men returning from war and into civilian life. And why is that happening? Well, women, after independence, they wanted to continue that leadership role that they played in the society. Nevertheless, men returning from war, they wanted to go back to what they call the normal or traditional perspective, whereby women play a secondary role in their society. So this created an area of tension, I say, between men and women in East Timor. Also, there has been a paradigm, clashes, I would say, of paradigms between traditional perception about women and men. As, for example, we were talking before about that, the issue of dowry or payment of marriage, or to get married. And this is completely in the opposite to what we promote now in, for example, the United Nations or NGOs. They promote ideas about women equality, human rights, and this clashes with traditional notions whereby women are basically owned by their husbands. So these two paradigms are part of the dynamic process that is experienced in post-conflict societies as East Timor. However, my research has focused more on the issue of the transformation of masculinity. What is to be a man, I would say, in post-conflict societies. And we see also a transformation happening on East Timor. And just to give you an example of what I'm talking about, East Timor, for example, as you know, is a very rural, agricultural, traditional society, whereby the ownership of land and relationship of man with land provide that transition process from childhood to adulthood to most young males. Nevertheless, the transformation that East Timor has experienced in the last 10 years has made and has altered these gender understandings and has altered how men are perceived as the breadwinners in their societies. Not surprisingly, we see now a more, I would say, urban understanding of what is meant to be a man in East Timor, whereby the notion of breadwinners are associated with formal employment. So when you ask many young males in the streets of Dili what do they want, they say, well, we want a job in the government, we want a desk job. And this and it sounds very familiar for us because we are part of this, I would say, mindset. Nevertheless, in a country as Timor, these are very new ideas and new values that have been incorporated, particularly since the post-independence period. The problem, not the problem, the issue that I see here is also a rise of frustration and alienation of many young males particularly in the city of Dili, because unemployment reaches around 45% in East Timor, particularly among those between 15 and 30 years old. Unemployment means that men are unable to get married, therefore that transition towards adulthood is incomplete. Marriage in the context, cultural context of East Timor is the rite of passage from childhood to adulthood. So men that are unable to get a job and are unable to marry, they're always going to be considered a child or adolescents, and therefore they increase their frustration and alienation, and they find in gangs or what they call martial art groups in their country that sense of belonging and meaning for many of their aspirations. So what is the importance of this? I think that we have come to a point, in my opinion, that we look at the issue of youth violence in developing countries as a security problem. Nevertheless, I think that we have to move also beyond this discourse and move beyond economic factors such as unemployment, for example, which has been pinpointing in many, many ways as the factor driving youth towards violence. I hear in many cases in Africa or in Southeast Asia that youth violence is linked to unemployment. And it is. But I also see it as, in the case of East Timor in particular, as a transformation of that gender role and that notion of what male and female or men and women means in these societies. That's why I want to conclude saying that we need to incorporate into our policies and our practices as NGO workers or as government workers and have a perspective of gender perspective of youth violence, whereby we identify these issues in which new values and new way of perceiving ourselves affects the way we behave. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Nelson. Thank you. So, Nelson shared with us some experience of his experience from Timor, right? And he showed us example of youth violence in post-independence East Timor. And we can see why young males have become securitized and portrayed as new enemies of the state, threatening the country's path to prosperity and peace. So, well, from